Okay, so I'm going to take the example of a certain mouse-related rabbit, and I'm going to use this as an object lesson for how we might approach breaking down a character if you have to storyboard them, if you have to draw this character literally thousands of times in all kinds of situations, but you can't possibly recreate this level of detail. I'm going to do a quick breakdown of this character to see how we can draw them a little bit more simply, but very recognizably for the purpose of a storyboard. So the first thing I would kind of do with this character is kind of do a very simple star person. I'm just going to borrow from the pose here and just go according to the pose. And I've got literally no details about this. And then I'm going to look at this and kind of compare and see what I can learn from this character. So first thing I learned from this character has a teeny tiny waist, very small narrow shoulders, very small narrow torso. Literally that might not even be small enough, and larger hips. So the character also has a very large head comparatively. This might look a little too big right now, but having done this tutorial twice now, I can tell you that's probably not big enough. Maybe it just needs to be down a little bit more. One thing I do kind of notice is that I drew the crotch a little bit too high there, so I'm going to redraw that a little lower and see. So I just kind of got like slim but broad hips at the same time. Like that's the nuance of like them having character designed this extremely well and in extreme detail. So I'm not going to worry too much about the drop crotch there. After I've got an approximation of a star person and I've learned a little bit from that, I'm going to look at the next biggest thing about them, which is their silhouette. So some silhouette indicators here are the ears, for example, which are a good like quarter of the body height, and they have this gap in between them, which I'm going to kind of note there as well. I'm not really worried about how the ears look. I'm more just worried about if they're large enough. Those might actually not be large enough. So I'm gonna extend them up just a little bit. And after that, what is the next sort of biggest silhouette indicator? She's wearing a very form-fitting kind of uniform, which we'll break down just now. There's the little tail in the back, and then there's rather large feet comparatively, like proportionally large feet. Not Bugs Bunny huge, but big enough that they make a distinctive part of the silhouette. After that, I'm going to look at volumetric lines. The volumetric lines on this character, I'll just indicate what they are here, are these kind of lines where bits of the clothing start and end. And these are very helpful because not only do the volumetric lines give a certain, like they conform to what the character looks like, so they're not cutting straight across the character like that. They conform to the character's shape, and they're an easy way to indicate volume on a 2D character. But they also are a very important part of the silhouette. So you can kind of see the interplay of like dark colors versus lighter colors here. The darker pants, the black belts, the badge, which is its own little gold color on there, the protective vest, and so on. So I'm going to, in fact, the only thing that's really standing proud of her character at all, out of the whole, apart from the details of the pouches on her side, the only other detail that's really standing out to me is her collar, which sort of indicates to me it's like, yeah, it's her job. She's wearing a collar because it's kind of her job. And there's little details like that, little details like her bracers, for example, that kind of make her look quite tough, as opposed to just kind of an innocent abroad, which she is in the movie. And then after we've kind of dealt with volumetric lines there, the torso thing's a little harder to indicate, so I might need to be fairly specific on breaking that down. Like if I was drawing this character, for example, I'd this little vest here. It's almost like it's really tiny on her top. It's almost like a sports bra. But that's something I would have to be aware of as I'm sort of drawing this character. Again, the head looks enormous, but really the heads can't be too big on this type of character sometimes, especially once we start breaking down and going to what the eyes look like comparatively. It's ridiculous. So we've got some of the volumetric lines there. Now we go in for the details, for the telling details, for the details that might show up in the storyboard. So obviously those are the knee pads. Knee pad can kind of stand proud there. Maybe there's a little bit of bulk around the pouches and things. I'm not even going to draw like the dots on them. You can if you want, if you really, really want to, but you don't really have to get into that sort of detail with storyboards mostly. And then the badge, of course, which is maybe it's fairly prominent because it's the thing this character is very proud of. I'm just going to swap the arms on there really quickly because that's annoying me. Okay, now we get into the details of the face. So if I go and draw over the face and just give a little approximation of how big the facial features are. I'm going to use the rough pupils in there as well, and I drag this over to this character. You'll kind of see how that face is that head isn't really that big, and not maybe I overdrew it just a little bit, but it's like as long as you kind of have. I just drew a blob of a head over there, but as long as I can kind of maintain this ratio of like how close the nose and the mouth are together, how small the nose and the mouth are compared to the eyes, as long as I can basically keep that ratio, and I forgot the eyebrows, they're very important indicators on the character as well, but as long as I can keep that kind of ratio, that will look like this character's face. I'm also not going to try and do, I'm also not going to try and do too much when it comes to the pupils, just because I have a personal preference not to do these kind of very large, like, I don't know, these huge pupils in a character's eyes, unless it's for a very specific expression. You can kind of get away with that in 3D. You can't really, it's much harder to kind of get away with in drawing for some reason. So I kind of just tend to prefer these much more malleable little dot eyes or dash eyes that can easily kind of go all over the place. I can make them indicate whatever I kind of want to, so long as they are relatively within proportion. So once I've got this character, which I'm quite pleased with after like 3 times of drawing them, I'm going to try and test this character out in various poses. One other thing I want to mention here is, like, you might sort of see the change in the white around the mouth as a volumetric line, and it is. But because it's around the mouth, I'm actually not, and because it rather changes what the character looks like in the drawing, I'm not going to bother with that throughout the storyboarding phase. Anything that overcomplicates, especially the face and the hands, I'm going to leave out in the storyboarding phase entirely. So even if the character like had rings on their hands, for example, I'm mostly going to leave those out unless the attention is drawn to those rings. But usually the main modes for expression on a character are first the face, then the hands, and maybe firstly or lastly the entire pose. Those are the main emotional indicators on a character. So especially with the face, especially with the hands, if the hands are within the torso, for example, I'm not going to draw very much. I'm not going to detail the torso too much. So let's try this character out in like maybe a bit of a drama pose, like yelling at somebody. It's like a very typical sort of yelling kind of pose. Maybe telling them off a little bit or something. What are the ears doing there? I'm not sure. Like I'm just trying to see what I would actually use there, and what actually maybe is hard to fit in there. Like I forgot the nose, and the nose might be a little bit difficult to kind of fit in there. But little things like how this character maybe stand if they were especially mad, for example. Like what's their hand kind of doing? I don't even think the arms are quite this big either. It makes her again, like I'm overdrawing the top. The top is a lot bigger on how I'm drawing her here than how I have now learned to draw her. And little things like how much bust to give her, how much hip to give her, and so on. Those are things that I will sort of refine as I go along. But mostly, the details don't really super matter as long as you can kind of tell. As long as you can tell what the character is. If this character was going through a bunch of costume changes, for example, the costume might actually be much more important in the storyboard. For example, if you had a superhero, I remember when we had storyboarding on a show with superhero characters, for example, you want to show whether the superhero character is like in their school uniform or whether they're in their superhero costume. So then the costume really matters. But if the character never really changes out of their costume, and it's just sort of assumed throughout that they're always in a single type of costume, then I don't know, why would I try too hard to indicate too much about that character's design? Why would I go into all of this design detail if I didn't need to, for example? So yeah, that's just a way that I might break down a character, how I might use them for the purpose of storyboarding and kind of getting the impression of this character, getting the important parts of this character across. Hope you enjoyed that. Cheers and take care.